Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the M1 Abrams. Now, this is the Tier 7 American tank in Armored Warfare. This is a PvE match in hard mode, and we're just going to kind of take this thing for a spin and see what we can do with it. Now, I've only just recently unlocked this tank. The XM1 was previous to this, and the next tank in this line is the M1A1 Abrams, which I believe comes with a 120 millimeter gun, whereas this one is just a 105. But I find that it hits very well, and it's very accurate even on the move. It doesn't really show in this battle, but it is a very, very strong tank, and I've enjoyed playing it so far. Is it worth all the effort it took to get to it? Yeah, easily. It totally does the job. Right now. I've more or less decided to pursue the American main battle tank line and the Russian main battle tank line, not just because of the varying strengths of the Russian tanks and the American tanks, but because the Russian tanks tend to hit a little bit harder but be a little bit lighter on the ammo. In terms of even though they're covered with explosive reactive armor in many areas, which is strong against heat, they don't tend to do that well against sabot shells. So I've picked the Russian line not just because of their hard-hitting guns, but also because of their the unlocks that come along the tree, which you can unlock that module to level 3, which I believe it's called experimental propellant, which improves the damage of all your shells on all your tanks. So I've kind of elected for that reason to go down the Russian line. But right now we're talking about this tank here, the M1 Abrams. And the M1 Abrams definitely is an excellent, excellent tank. Now, I tend to vary between sabot shells and heat shells, and I default go for the sabot shells more often than not, just because I feel that getting penetrations and getting damage even when there's an overmatch is generally the way to go. But when I do have the opportunity to switch to a heat shell and fire it at a tank that I know I can penetrate, I do tend to switch to the heat shells. I don't carry HE. I try to keep it simple. I try to keep it uncomplicated while I'm fighting, and so far these tactics have paid off for me very well. Now, as you can see, I'm switching to heat here. And the heat shells, I believe they travel a little bit slower. And I mean, visually you can see that. But overall, they do tend to get the job done. But against tanks like this with, ERA, it's a little bit more difficult. So when I do have a heat shell loaded, I tend to default aim for targets that I know I can penetrate right out of the box with heat shells. Now with the American tanks, as I was saying, the difference between the heat shells and the sabot shells, or the penetrator shells, isn't that great, whereas in a Russian tank the disparity is far higher. I believe like I think their sabot shells are somewhere in the 400s for the T90, but the heat shell can do up to 827 damage, and that's obviously a very significant amount of damage, and can be quite catastrophic a hit even in the late stage of the game. So it's one of the reasons why, as soon as I get done with this, I can't wait to really get started in earnest on the T90. Now, I have been pursuing the Russian line, but mainly so far I've only been getting the daily double in that line and then walking away from it, and more focusing my efforts towards the American main battle tanks. Now, here in this battle, I mean, having played this so much during the early access, I kind of know where the spawns are. So I'm pre-staging myself as best as possible to be in a position to best take advantage of where the enemy is going to spawn, and to do the most damage possible. So what I'm doing is I'm moving now to behind where the enemy is going to spawn, and I'm going to stage myself up so only my turret is exposed. and I'm firing into the rear of their tanks. Which, I mean, if you can get a rear shot with a gun like right into the engine block, those seem to be, in my experience, the most damaging shots that you can do to your enemies. Now, one of the things that I also do is I've been only really playing the PvE battles. I've been avoiding PvP just because PvP tends to, I mean, when a battle starts to go bad, it generally snowballs and it just becomes terrible. Whereas with PvE, you get more predictable results, it's less frustrating. And when you start to really learn the battles and know the battles, then it's easier to really excel as a player. And yeah, less frustrating. So I've kind of elected to play the PvE side of this game and kind of forego the PvP. So right now I'm just kind of trying to, kind of coax these guys into triggering the capture point so that the enemies will spawn. Now, typically the enemies will spawn directly ahead of me with the ass of their tank facing towards me. So we're just waiting, waiting for. There it is. And there we go. So we're just driving shells into the engine block. One of the things I always try to go for engine shots because you also can get that bonus damage of an engine fire, which, is damage that, you have to pay for each shell that you fire, but, when you set someone on fire, that damage is free. So it's just one of the, the little ways I try to max out my returns in this game.
Identify target. Hostile tank.
So I'm still being fairly careful and trying not to expose the hull of my tank too much. Mainly I'm looking for the high return shots. The shots that'll deliver the most damage and therefore the most, cash return per shot and experience as well. You also do get a small bonus for getting the killing blow on someone, which I think is supposed to negate, the fact that, you just fired a shell to take out the last, 70 or 80 hit points. Now I'm stuck here with heat shells facing towards the front of this tank, which is not the best option for heat. So I'm electing to shoot through the visor. Now the first shot does reduce damage, but as you're going to see, when I go right through that view pane, now all of a sudden I'm doing full damage instead of, I think, the first one, which kind of went into the driver or the commander's cupola there. So once I was able to drive those shells through that little visor or that little gunner sight, then I was doing full damage because I was aiming right into the body of the turret and not just sort of trimming through the commander's cupola. So now I'm just kind of moving in to cap things off with grabbing a few, kind of capture points at the end of the match. And then after that, the battle ends and we'll see how we did. Now you'll find with the American main battle tanks, even though they don't put out that high alpha damage that the Russian tanks do, the added armor protection and just the rate of fire tends to make up for that, especially if you vary your shells between heat and sabot shells. So the overall difference, it's one of the reasons why I prefer the American tanks, is they have overall I find better armor. And they do get better armor earlier in the game. I mean, when you get to the M60A3, I believe that tank is called, you are able to unlock explosive reactive armor, which kind of, it's these kind of odd looking plates that kind of cover the tank, and it really makes the early game when you're doing PvE a lot easier because the enemy fires so much heat shells and so many HE shells that you're able to shrug off quite a lot of damage early on. And you can see did very well for my team. Got the highest experience and I believe the second highest damage out of anybody. And look at this. I mean, this is one of the things I love about this game. The robust reporting information after every battle. I mean, just statistics, statistics, statistics. Everything you would really need to know about the battle. And here you can see, I believe I highlight it right here. I mean, the higher you go in the game, the higher your returns. There's actually a tier modifier on your cash and experience returns. So as you're leveling up, you're also scaling up your rewards, which is nice. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.